The world was on the verge of salvation, and the monster's fangs were falling off after years of suffering. Soon, the world would breathe the air of peace and freedom. And now we will complete the final part of the World War II series. On January the 14th, 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt attended a meeting in Casablanca, Morocco, with representatives of Free France. The Allies agreed not to end the fighting until the Axis forces surrendered unconditionally. Churchill tried to postpone opening a Western front against Germany, but it was agreed to open a Southern front. De Gaulle felt resentful because he had been sidelined in some discussions, especially those concerning the fate of the Middle East and North Africa. After the surrender of the German Sixth Army, General Paulus was captured and later tried. He was imprisoned for 8 years, and after his release, he settled in East Germany. Hitler tried to cover up his defeat at Stalingrad, so his Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, held a large rally in Berlin's Sportplatz, calling for total war and urging support for the Führer. On February the 8th, 1942, Albert Speer became Minister of Armaments. The German army had exhausted a large portion of its equipment, and there was an urgent need to increase production, especially after the United States entered the conflict and what happened at Stalingrad. Speer succeeded in increasing military production, but it wasn't enough. Women were enticed to work in weapons factories, and men were sent to the front to fight. In May 1943, the Allies captured Tunisia. Rommel had left in March due to health problems. The Axis powers lost North Africa, a devastating blow. The Deuce proposed a peace agreement with Russia and a focus on North Africa, especially after the failure of Operation Barbarossa. But Hitler was not convinced. On July the 5th, 1943, the Germans launched a fierce attack on western Russia in what became known as the Kursk Offensive, which included the largest tank battle in history. The German forces were under the command of prominent generals such as Manstein and Gnther von Kluge led the German forces, and the Tiger tanks were the most distinctive feature of the German army in that battle. The Soviet forces were under the command of Generals Zhukov and Vasilevsky, and the T-34 tank was the backbone of the Soviet army. The tanks fought in very confined spaces. The Soviet army suffered heavy losses, but they managed to halt the German advance. The Germans were forced to retreat because the Allies opened a new front in southern Europe via Sicily on July the 20th, 1943. King Victor Emmanuel III summoned Mussolini and informed him of his dismissal, then ordered his arrest. However, in September of the same year, Hitler managed to rescue his ally Mussolini by having him kidnapped by helicopter. This mission was undertaken by a prominent German commander, Otto Scorsini. Mussolini was subsequently appointed head of a region in northern Italy. The Allies advanced into southern Italy, overcoming the difficult terrain, and on June the 4th, 1944, Rome was liberated. The Allies advanced, and German forces withdrew north. At dawn on June the 6th of the same year, the Allies launched a major landing operation known as Operation Normandy, in which approximately 130,000 men crossed the English Channel towards the French coast. The fleet consisted of 5,000 ships to transport troops and equipment, and thousands of aircraft that provided full air support to the Allies and contributed to the landings behind enemy lines. After fierce battles, the Allies were able to break through the German defense line and advance towards Paris. Hitler attempted a counterattack, but it failed. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was the field commander for the defense of the beaches. In the event the Allies decided to launch any landing operation, he believed it was necessary to decide the battle in the first hours by preventing the Allies from landing and establishing beachheads. Otherwise the battle would end. However, he disagreed with the High Command, which did not want to concentrate the panzer forces at a specific point. When the Allies landed at dawn on June the 6th, 1944, the counterattack was slow because orders were issued by Hitler first, and the distribution of the panzer divisions weakened the German defenses, allowing the Allies to penetrate them easily. The Germans launched a counterattack on the evening of June the 6th by creating a gap between the Canadian and British forces, but it failed due to Allied air superiority and naval bombardment from battleships. The Germans tried to prevent the fall of Caen by launching strong counterattacks between June and July 1944, but all of them failed. The panzer divisions were exhausted, and the Allies captured Caen. Returning to the Pacific Ocean on November the 20th, 1943, the United States attacked the Japanese-held island of Taro, a key strategic target. The American forces included the 1st Marine Brigade. There were approximately 4,500 well-entrenched Japanese soldiers in strong underground concrete fortifications. The Japanese soldiers were ordered to fight to the death. The fighting resembled street warfare. The Americans suffered heavy losses, especially during the landings on the island, where American soldiers were within range of Japanese fire. However, the Americans eventually gained control of the island. From 1943 until the summer of 1945, the Allies continuously bombed German cities. The aim of these attacks was to inflict maximum damage on German infrastructure, destroy the Reich's industrial capabilities, and cause maximum civilian casualties to force the Germans to surrender. The most infamous of these attacks was the Allied bombing of Dresden, which almost completely destroyed the city. From late 1944, Allied aircraft bombed Berlin around the clock, raid after raid without pause. The Germans responded with V-2 rockets, the last hope for the Reich. On June the 22nd, 1944, the third anniversary of the German offensive, the Soviets launched a fierce counter-offensive against German forces in Belarus. The Red Army attacked with over 2 million soldiers, while the German army numbered around 800,000. The Soviet army completely destroyed the German defensive lines in Belarus, capturing thousands of German soldiers and officers. The German army was suffering from shortages of supplies and provisions, a lack of air support, and the opening of a new front in the west with the Allies. The Nazi beast was slowly catching its breath. On August 15, 1944, the Allies launched another landing on the coast of southern France in Provence. The Allies were able to overcome the German defenses and liberate major cities in southern France such as Marseille, Toulouse, and Nice within a few weeks. On August 19, 1944, a popular uprising against the Nazis erupted in Paris. The French resistance, the Free French forces led by General Charles de Gaulle, and American forces liberated Paris and seized government buildings. German General Dietrich von Schultz surrendered and refused to obey Hitler's orders to destroy the city. Paris was now free after more than 4 years of German occupation. On October 20, 1944, General MacArthur returned to the Philippines. He had fulfilled his promise. After leaving the Philippines upon reaching Australia, he had vowed to return. A famous naval battle took place between the United States and Japan, the Battle of Lake Gulf, considered the largest naval battle in history. Approximately 200 naval vessels participated in this battle. Thousands of aircraft were deployed. Japan divided its forces into 3 naval groups to attack the Allies from different directions, but the Allies used submarines for reconnaissance. An American submarine successfully spotted the Japanese forces. The Allies launched a combined land and air assault, and several fierce battles ensued. The remaining Japanese aircraft carriers and many of the Japanese fleet's large ships were destroyed. In contrast, the United States lost 3 aircraft carriers and some warships. However, after this battle, Japan was no longer able to launch large-scale, open attacks against the United States. This battle paved the way for the recapture of the Philippines from Japan, and the Americans were able to wrest a large portion of Philippine territory from the Japanese. the Allies discovered the horrific crimes committed by the Japanese against prisoners. Going back further, on August 2, 1939, the brilliant physicist Albert Einstein sent a letter to President Roosevelt warning him of the Germans' ability to produce an atomic bomb. Einstein himself, the man who formulated the equation upon which the idea of the atomic bomb was based, said that trying to build an atomic bomb was like trying to catch birds in the dark. This came after a visit from one of his close students. Anti-Nazis were concerned. Einstein feared that if the Nazis succeeded in building this bomb, it would be used to strike the United States and European cities. After the letter reached the White House, the American president took a serious stance and hastened preparations to build the bomb. Later, in 1942, work began on the Manhattan Project to create the first atomic bomb in history, but Albert Einstein did not know that the United States would be the first to use this bomb. On February 13, 1945, American and British aircraft launched a massive bombing campaign against the German city of Dresden. The relentless raids, day and night, continued for days, razing the city to the ground and causing thousands of casualties. Dresden was a major communications and railway hub. However, there were those who opposed the Allied actions, considering them a grave crime. As the fall of Germany at that time seemed inevitable, the city was also a unique architectural masterpiece, with distinctive landmarks dating back to the Middle Ages, before the Allies reduced it to rubble. Since 1943, the Allies intensified their bombing of German cities, resulting in tens of thousands of casualties. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels visited the bombed cities. Meeting with the families of the victims and the wounded, he rallied the people behind their leader, Hitler, delivering speeches on the radio, in newspapers, at conferences, and in public spaces. He was truly adept at deception and boosting morale. On February 4, 1945, Churchill and Roosevelt traveled to Yalta to meet with Joseph Stalin. Held discussions about the future of Europe after the war and the measures necessary to disarm Germany and eradicate Nazism. The Soviet Union also pledged to enter the war against Japan 3 months after Germany's defeat. The war was on the verge of ending. Stalin wanted to complete the attack on Berlin, while the Americans and British wanted to wait until the end of winter. As the fall of the Reich was only a matter of time, they did not want further losses, but he refused and was determined to advance on Berlin quickly. Churchill and Roosevelt feared that the Soviets would seize Berlin before them, so they decided to complete the attack quickly. But Stalin won the race, or perhaps the British and Americans left the field open for the Russians to take over Berlin. But Churchill was worried about the Baltic states and Eastern Europe, which Stalin had seized. He even considered attacking the Soviet Union after the fall of Berlin, to force Stalin to keep his promises. This was madness. On April 12, 1945, President Roosevelt died of a stroke. He had led the country for many years, but fate did not allow him to see his country victorious. The United States, one of the world's superpowers, was shocked by the death of its president, who had served the country for 12 years. He was the only president in U.S. history to be elected to the White House for 4 consecutive terms. He was succeeded by his vice president, Harry Truman. Hitler hoped that it might be possible to reach an agreement with Roosevelt's successor, but it was too late. The fight continued until victory or surrender. The conflict between the United States and the Empire of Japan in the Pacific Ocean continued. The Americans were seizing island after island and using them as military bases to attack Japan. They were getting closer and closer to the Japanese islands themselves. The closer the Americans got, the more the Japanese resisted. Modern American aircraft took off from bases they had captured near Japan to launch powerful strikes. Most battles were won by the Americans, but both sides suffered heavy losses. When the Allied forces reached the Nazi concentration camps, they could hardly believe the horrific crimes committed against humanity against the prisoners. Germans were forced to march to the camps to witness firsthand the atrocities committed by the Nazis. Most Germans claimed they were unaware of what was happening in those camps. In reality, many prisoners in those camps were subjected to mass executions in the gas chambers, and forbidden experiments were conducted. The most notorious of these camps was Auschwitz, located in Poland. The infamous Rudolf Hess was in charge of the camp, and the Nazi Dr. Mengele conducted forbidden experiments on children there, aiming to produce a pure race that could then be used for reproduction. Rudolf Hess was tried in Nuremberg, was sentenced to death and executed at Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. Dr. Mengele fled to Latin America and was pursued unsuccessfully. On the night of April the 29th, 1945, Hitler married his mistress, Eva Braun. On April the 30th, the couple decided to commit suicide together. The Russians were only a few hundred meters from the Reich Chancellery. After Hitler's suicide, his body and Eva Braun's were cremated to prevent identification by the Russians. Hitler did not want to be tried or humiliated, so he left the responsibility to Joseph Goebbels, who committed suicide the following day with his wife after they had killed their 6 children. The Russians entered the city and raised the red flag over the Reichstag and the Chancellery. World War II ended, but one chapter remained unfinished. Japan had not yet been defeated and had not surrendered, despite suffering successive losses. Japanese kamikaze pilots were ramming American aircraft carriers. These attacks terrified the Americans and caused heavy losses. Japan was prepared to sacrifice all its sons to avoid a U.S. invasion of Japan. The United States estimated that it would lose nearly 1 million American soldiers if it landed in Japan and occupied it. However, on July the 16th, 1945, the first atomic bomb in history was tested in the New Mexico desert. The United States wanted to end the war as soon as possible, but this was not possible without overcoming the obstacle of Japan. Therefore, on August the 6th, 1945, the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Approximately 70,000 people were killed instantly at the moment the bomb was dropped. This number later rose to 140,000 by the end of 1945. Hiroshima was completely destroyed by a single bomb, but the Japanese refused to surrender. On August the 7th, the United States dropped another bomb on the city of Nagasaki, called Fat Man, killing 40,000 people instantly, and the number later reached 70,000. Hiroshima was home to the headquarters of the Japanese Second Army, and had a large population. The city itself was also relatively large. Nagasaki was an important industrial city with massive military factories. The Americans wanted to study the effects of the bomb on humans and the extent of the destruction it caused, as it was the first atomic bomb in history. After the United States dropped the Fat Man bomb, it threatened to drop more. Japan had no choice but to surrender. On August the 15th, 1945, the Emperor addressed the Japanese people, announcing his surrender. Japan finally capitulated, and on September the 2nd, it officially signed its surrender treaty, thus ending the final chapter of World War II. 6 years of destruction and fighting left millions of victims everywhere. It was a brutal war, both in its days and events. It paved the way for the creation of the United Nations to prevent future world wars. Alliances collapsed, and new ones emerged. A long Cold War began between the Eastern and Western blocs. It was as if the world had gone to sleep and a new world had awakened.